Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so very much for joining A Voice of Our Own. My name is Trinity Ford, and I'm the Interim President of People with Disability Australia, or PWDA for short. PWDA is a national peak disability rights and advocacy organisation made up of and led by people with disability. We have a cross-disability focus, which means that we represent the interests of people with all kinds of disability. Our vision is for a socially just, accessible, and inclusive community in which the human rights, belonging, contribution, potential, and diversity of all people with disability are recognized, respected, and celebrated with pride. I'm coming to you today from Wongal land in Eora Nation, and I acknowledge its elders. A little about me. I'm a proud neurodivergent trans woman with a range of disabilities, spanning those categories of physical, neurological, psychosocial, and sensory. I'm also a research and policy consultant and a training lawyer. As an image description, I'm a fair-skinned woman with copper red hair, wearing clear-framed glasses and my dainty little gold fob necklace. I'm also trying to keep cool in this heat wave in Sydney with my little ice pack around my shoulders. If you come across me in public, I'm generally equipped with a color-coordinated walking stick with my outfit, or failing that, a walker or motorized wheelchair. I'm proud to be here with you all at this event to share our voices, experiences, and discuss visions for our future and the pathways to realize them. A Voice of Our Own was designed by and for people with disability to mark International Day of People with Disability Our Way, because this is a day that must be not just about us, but also with us, for us, and by us. Today, we've got an exciting lineup of disability advocates and voices from our community discussing inclusion for people with disability, disability rights, and the importance of the disability pride movement. I'm also, I should have said in my image description, wearing my disability pride t-shirt. We will also enjoy a wonderful performance by PWDA member and award-winning musician, writer, and disability advocate Eliza Hull. I thank our speakers for being a part of this event and for their continued leadership in creating change by and for our community. And I thank everybody, all of you, for joining us in this today. I would like now to hand over to Wiradjuri Elder and PWDA member, Uncle Paul Constable Calcott, to perform an acknowledgement of country. PWDA Deputy CEO Megan Spindler-Smith will then be your next facilitator and take us through to the next part of the conference. So I thank you once again for being here, and I hope you enjoy today's event. Uncle Paul.
Thank you, Trinity. Hello, everybody. Before I start, I would just also like to give a description of myself for people who may be visually impaired. I'm a fair-skinned black fella, but don't let that fool you. My father said that I was designed to go into community by stealth, so they don't know you're there till it's too late. But I'm a proud Aboriginal man. I'm in my home studio at the moment, which is pretty much always a mess. I've just finished a project that's still there. But today, I'm also a proud ambassador for International Day of People with Disability, and this is a lovely honour to be doing the acknowledgement at this meeting today. So I apologise to interpreters because I'm about to speak in language, but I will say what I interpret myself later. So everybody, Yamadumara, Nuanara, Mamba Nurampo, Yiramadelia, Badu Aradri, Winya, Gabi Gabi Jinabara Diraban, Gidiamara Muyolong. So, hi everyone. I basically just said, hello, I hope you're all well. My name is Uncle Paul. I use the two terms of uncle for community version and my family version. I said that I'm a proud Wiradjuri man and I now live on Gubbi Gubbi Jinnaburra country. And I always pay respects and sit quietly with elders. So today is a wonderful opportunity for a voice of our own. We all have many voices, and I think everyone should take a little bit of time to reflect on who the traditional owners are of the land that you're meeting on today. With 21st century technology, we now have the ability to meet from many different places and many different language groups. So it'd be really good to always just have a little think and reflect on the people that travelled and cared for that land for thousands of years before European arrival. And today, when we're conducting business on country, I would like people to think about and reflect on the fact that there has been many, many meetings held on this land, many, many conversations. And at the end of the day, it's about sharing stories. And I once met a lovely old elder out in the desert, and he said to me that he sits and shares stories. Firstly, what we do is I get to know your way, you get to know my way, and together we get to know many ways. So let's today share many ways, many stories, and leave this meeting richer, stronger, and more connected. So thank you again for the opportunity to acknowledge, to do the acknowledgement at the start of this very important gathering. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uncle Paul, and thank you for helping us start such an important discussion in the way that we hope to continue. So I really appreciate your acknowledgement of country. For those of you who don't know me, I am Megan Spindler-Smith. I am the Deputy CEO of People with Disability Australia. For those that would like a visual description, I am a pale, larger-bodied, femme-presenting person with red hair, fringe glasses, and I'm wearing black. And I'm wearing some absolutely fabulous Inu rainbow feather earrings by a brilliant First Nations disabled artist from up my way called DN Art. So I figured I would use this as an opportunity to do a tiny shout out to them. I will be taking you through some of the housekeeping and accessibility for this event. So ostensibly for the housekeeping, what I'm going to ask you to do is listen to this information so you know how we will be running the conference, how you can use different functions in Zoom, and how, if you need it, you can get technical help. This event is being recorded and will be published on public channels. If you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your video. You can do this by pressing the stop video icon. You can find this icon in the Zoom toolbar. It's an icon of a little video camera. We also have some amazing Auslan interpreters and a captioner who are joining us in this meeting. You'll be able to see the interpreters on the screen during the meeting, and they will swap about every 10 to 15 minutes. Right now, you can see the wonderful Beck. If you want to see the captions, press the closed captions button. You can find this in the Zoom toolbar, and it's got an icon with CC on it. What we're going to do is keep everyone's microphone turned off just to help us run the event without lots of background noise. And if you need to ask any questions or comment during the discussion, I'm going to tell you how. The first is by raising your hand. If time permits, at the end of a panel discussion, we will ask if anyone wants to ask a question, and you can ask questions in different ways. If you want to ask your question verbally, you can use the raise hand button, which I believe is about to be demonstrated, to indicate your wish to speak. We will then say the name of each person who can speak. We will ask you to turn your microphone on when it's your turn to speak, or we will turn your microphone on for you if you're on a landline. If you can't see that raise hand icon, please press on participants, reaction, or react in the Zoom toolbar. You should see the raise hand button in the list of options that appears, but you can also get to this through the shortcut Control, Shift, and then the letter Y by clicking those buttons at the same time. If you are using the Zoom app on your mobile phone, press on Show Participants, then select More to see the raise hand button. And if you're on a landline, dial 9 if you wish to speak. The PWDA team are demonstrating this at the moment, And when you have a look, you'll see what it looks like when it's been selected. To be fair to all attendees, in the time we have available, please make sure your questions and comments are relevant to the discussion, and please keep them as short and to the point as possible. It's really important to note that we may not be able to give everyone who wishes the opportunity to speak or answer all questions received. Now, we do have a Q&A function. You can also ask questions through this Q&A function on Zoom. Look for the Q&A button in the toolbar on your Zoom screen. Once you click that Q&A button to open a Q&A window, you can type in your question into that box that says type your question here. Press enter or click send to submit your question. You can choose to be identified, or if you would prefer to stay anonymous, you are very welcome to do that as well. When you're asking a question, that's your choice. Then we've got the chat box. So up in the corner, there's a chat box. Generally, we won't be taking questions in the chat box. However, if you can't access the raise hand button or the Q&A function, please let us know and send your questions in the user called event questions, to the user called event questions in the chat box. We encourage everyone to use the chat box to communicate to each other. We want this to be an interactive event and one where everyone attending can just connect and share. And then we have technical support. We have some fantastic technical support. Throughout the event, you will hear the voice of PWDA team member Anastasia, who will communicate with our facilitators about time or contributions from attendees. And this is what Anastasia's voice sounds like.
Hi, I'm Anastasia, and this is my voice.
If you are having any technical problems, you can contact the user called technical support in the chat box. You can also contact our staff about any technical questions via email, which is comms, COMMS, @pwd.org.au, or phone or text. So there are 2 numbers and they are showing up in the box, but I will read them out. They are 0490 839 986 or 0492 847 551. These numbers are in the chat just in case you need them. And finally, thank you so much for your patience during the event. There may be some delays while we move between speakers and sessions, and we thank you so much for your patience. We will be taking a 5-minute break about halfway through, so as part of the agenda, but please feel free to take time away at any point if you need it. So we are going to run an audience poll. So before we start the official agenda of the conference, we'd love to know a little about who you are. We're going to launch a poll, which will have a few questions on it. It won't take too long. And we would love to hear about you and get you to complete as much. It's only going to be open for 90 seconds. And the questions are, what state are you dialing in from today? Do you identify as a person with disability? And are you a member of PWDA? So it's launched and it's active right now.
We've just noticed that Victoria is missing from the poll. We know we've got many people from Victoria represented today, so feel free to let us know in the chat if that's the state that you're dialing in from.
Huge apologies, Victoria. We know you do exist. You're a very important state, so we'll make sure we keep that information. Thanks for letting us know, Anastasia.
This poll will close in 10 seconds.
While it's closing, I want to say a big thank you to everyone for completing the poll. I know that we have quite quite a few results coming in. Oh, I can see we have a lot of people joining us from all across Australia. We have 55% of us identify as people with disability, which is fantastic. And 32% of us are members of PWDA. So that's pretty exciting. Remember, if you are a person with disability, you can become a member of PWDA. And I always like a little bit of, poking of let's get people to join us to promote the human rights of equality and dignity of all people with disability in Australia. And you can get access to all of our events and activities, especially our ones that are member specific. It's free to join and a great way to connect with other people with disability and influence the work that we are doing. The PWD team are posting a link right now in the chat of our membership form. Okay, well, I think it's time to kick off for our first session. I want to just double check with our wonderful
I'm in a
tech
conference
team if
at the
we're
moment.
ready.
Full stop.
Can I just get everyone to just make
Full
sure
stop.
that their microphones are turned off? Because we're getting a little bit of background noise happening. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, brilliant. So I can see that we have our wonderful panel joining us right now, but I'm not running this panel. I'm going to hand over to somebody I have definitely fan-personed over way too many times and embarrassed them. And I'm going to do it again because it's lots of fun, but because I like to make it uncomfortable for them to kick off. But please join me in welcoming Akii Ngo, they, them, a trailblazing international multi-award winning professional and educator whose work spans advocacy, human rights, and intersectional inclusion. Akii is proudly multiply disabled, neurodivergent, queer, and a person of colour with lived experiences that fuel their tireless efforts to create positive, sustainable change for marginalised communities. From leading accessibility at Sydney World Pride in 2023 to shaping national strategies on disability and LGBTQIA+ inclusion, Akii is a fierce advocate for representation, co-design and justice. Their contributions span education, government, media and the arts, and consistently they are driving transformative change. Please give a warm welcome to Akii, whose passion and expertise is perfectly matched to be our moderator for this discussion. The floor is yours. I'm very excited. Over to you, Akii.
Thank you so much, Megan. I am thankful for your wonderful introduction. For those that don't know, we have a friendship, so it's not uncomfortable in the sense of uncomfortable. I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to be here today. And I firstly want to acknowledge the lands on which I am on. I'm in Victoria, and we have other fellow Victorians here that weren't captured on the poll, but we know we're here, and that will be corrected. And pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I'm located in Naarm, and pay my respects to elders past and present, recognising that sovereignty was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. In addition to just sharing, I'm not going to share much about myself as Megan had done so wonderfully. I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to be here today to have this wonderful group of panelists, which I will also be a part of as well. And in addition to the work that Megan has mentioned, I also do a lot of work in the survivor advocacy and activism space as a lived experience survivor of intimate partner and family violence. One of my disabilities is a direct result of intimate partner violence. So I do a lot of work within that space, and I'm very, very passionate about co-design and intersectional representation, working on the Domestic Family and Sexual Violence Commissioners Lived Experience Council, Victoria Disability Council, and various other working groups in the LGBTIQA space, like the LGBTIQA Justice Task Force, as an example. Just a bit of a descriptor of myself for anyone that may benefit from it. I'm an Asian person with light pale olive skin. I have very pink, purple, and blue hair. I'm quite glamorous presenting today because I'm going to the Victorian Disability Awards, which are happening concurrently at the moment. So I'm very delighted to be able to be here and also experience the awards space on International Day of People with Disabilities. So happy International Day of People with Disability, everyone. I am very delighted to welcome everyone today, and especially our panelists. Enough about me. I did want to also just highlight, I also live with debilitating chronic pain. So I'll be taking medications likely throughout this session. I promise I'm not snacking. They are medications and I do need them. But yeah, that's the only other thing. And I would love to introduce our panel members today, and they will introduce themselves when I pass over to them. So we have the wonderful Dr. Alistair McEwan, and Mason Furmage, and Dr. Scott Avery. Alistair, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Alistair here. Akii, thank you very much for that welcome. It's great to see you again, and it's wonderful to be part of this very important panel session. I'm Alistair, and I'm coming to you from Gadigal land. I pay my respect to their elders past and present. I also pay my respect to Aboriginal people who are part of this discussion today. I'm a white middle-aged man. I'm wearing glasses and I'm wearing a blue shirt. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. Anne?
And Mason, your audio isn't coming through at the moment.
I'm Ann Mason, not Anne. I grew up in the South of the United States, and I'm just lucky it wasn't Billy Lou or Bobby Sue or one of those names. I'm Ann Mason, and I'm coming to you from Gadigal land. I'm a very old woman with gray hair, fair skin, and I wear glasses. My accent is that of the United States, although I have lived in Australia for more than 50 years. It just hangs on. And I've been interested in advocating for people with disability for a very long time. I have had a disability since 1950, and I have the late effects of polio, which means that my muscles are gradually giving up, and so I use a wheelchair. I'm really happy to be here, and that's enough about me.
Thank you so much, Anne Mason. As a fellow wheelchair user, I agree. And Dr. Scott Avery.
Good to everyone. We says hello and welcome in my native language of Gatang. So I'm Dr. Scott Avery. I actually prefer Dr. Scott, which is a name that my First Nations disability community gave to me. I'm a professor now at the University of Technology, Sydney, UTS. Gadigal land is well represented today. I too from Gadigal land. I'm on the hunting tracks that go in the streets of Sydney. So I've got a deep purple shirt on, and I've actually got my badge for International Day of People with Disability here. I put that on today for it at the occasion. And I too have earrings of a special kind. They're actually called cochlear implants. So they're more of the cubist fashion than the funky ones that you are wearing, Akii. So, but they're still quite trendy. Cochlear is the new black.
Love that. Thank you, Dr. Scott. That was great. For those that are wondering, I'm wearing earrings that have the feature is intersectional on one ear and a watermelon on the other ear, which is what Dr. Scott was referring to. Thank you for all your introductions. It's so exciting to have you today to have this panel with the focus on inclusion for people with disability. And we have some questions regarding this topic, and we may, if time permits, have some questions from the audience. But firstly, we'll go into the first question, which is, how can we as people with disability and allies work together to ensure that inclusion efforts are intersectional and address the needs of people with diverse backgrounds, identities, and disabilities? And I would, Dr. Alistair, go first.
Thank you, Akii. A great question and a really important one. The theme of today, of course, is the voice of our own. And the disability community has a long and proud history of being very strong and united in the issues that matter most to us and being vocal. We've come a long way in that. And our strengths are the diversity that we can capture among the disability community, as well as being really clear to government and other stakeholders on what the issues are. Having said that, what's probably more important to me is working with allies and those who are not yet our allies, and that's hard. It's confronting, particularly when you are dealing with people who are opposed to what you're trying to achieve. And so I think for me, the experiences I've had is you need to take the time with people who I believe most people have good intentions. I like to assume that there are good intentions. It's the educational approach you have to take. It's spending time. It's exhausting, of course, but building our allies is probably crucial to getting everybody onto the same page. From personal experience, it's discomforting. It makes me angry at times. What I've learned is how to channel that anger into productive ways. So I think if we can continue our strength as a disability community in drawing on the diversity, being united when it really matters, and investing time, a lot of time, in building our ally base, I think we will go a long way.
Thank you. Absolutely agree with you there. And we got a lot of nods when you mentioned the anger, but we can refuel and what am I trying to say? Redirect that anger to something positive. So that's really great. Thank you for sharing that. Anne Mason?
Well, there are other things we can do too. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there are a few people who use their time and energy to play games. Well, a game that's called "My Disability is More Important Than Your Disability." And that simply wastes their efforts and doesn't take the movement farther at all. So I think that one of the things we can do is start to remember that we need to respect each other if we wish to have respect. That's mainly what we're looking for from the broader community, is respect. Respect for our capacities and respect for our abilities and just respect for us as human beings. Now, if we cannot treat each other with respect, we're going to have a hard time getting the broader community to treat us with respect. That's my take on the situation. I agree absolutely with everything Alistair said.
and there was.
Akii, your audio is just cut out briefly there.
No. Hello?
Not quite coming through. No, not quite coming through. We might get our technical support to work with you, and we may just move to Dr. Scott Avery for their response while we work through this technical issue.
Hello, everyone. I might just do a sound check with thumbs that people can hear me. That's what I do with my students in online, so love to see thumbs. Thank you for the question. I'm actually going to pick up on the word intersectional and what it really means. Now, I think it's become a bit of a buzzword, particularly in disability, strategy and policy. But intersectionality means more than, in my case, I'm a First Nations person with a disability. What intersectional means is that there are people in our communities who don't have a voice because they're, for example, a person with a disability who's Aboriginal and or a woman. Intersectionality really means that you're pushed to the margins of society. It's actually a very different concept to diversity. Diversity is about bringing people in who might represent a view. But in speaking about intersectionality, I speak about my community. My experience in speaking here is just a pathway to the richness and diversity of voices within our disability community. And I think this is what we really need to push the understanding, because when it gets translated into policy, that it kind of gets reduced and it loses its meaning. We should always remember that there are people outside the room who don't have a voice, and our job as allies and activists is finding a way to get their voice in so we understand as much as we can about the picture. We step aside, other people will take our place. They will bring more people in the room, that we actually understand our whole community. And I think that's, intersectionality helps us do that. The other thing is the thing about our allies and working together. And I've described them, our allies, as like bright green lily pads in a pond. And we're frogs, and we've got to jump from one lily pad to the next to get through the pond. And if we miss the pad, we fall into a murky pond. And I think our allies have a role in knowing how they can support us. Hello. And I think it's for the leaders in the disability community, people like PWD, the activists and that, to going, how can we help them find their place? When can they step up? But when should they step back and let someone else have a say? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. And I think my audio is back. I apologize. I had backup headset. I'm glad that I brought with me. Always good to be prepared. Disability ingenuity. Be prepared for everything. Because things can always go wrong. And all my panelists are nodding their head. I just wanted to highlight what Anne Mason said in relation to the respect within each other. There is lateral violence that exists within the disability community, which is unfortunate because we all essentially want the same thing. We want to be treated with respect, with dignity, and valued for who we are as individuals with lots of varying and different identities, which relates exactly to what Dr. Scott was saying in relation to intersectionality. And highlighting that it is not intersectionality, as you mentioned, it is kind of a buzzword. It's quite sexy to use, but it's very different from diverse. Intersectionality is recognizing the multiple levels of marginalization that may build and compound to each other. And your sharing of your experience, and if I may share mine in relation to my experiences as a first-generation Aussie from a refugee background, and the intergenerational trauma that my parents experienced from that, and their lack of understanding around disability, inclusion, accessibility, all of that. And so not having that really understanding of disability, and there's a lot of shame and stigma, and it still strongly exists within different cultural backgrounds. And so being here today with all of you, with leaders in the community, sharing your experiences, I hope that one day in all aspects of our community, disability pride exists, and the understanding of disability being a natural part of the human experience, and there's nothing broken or wrong. that we can be proud of who we are just as we are. Before I move on to the next question, Anne Mason, did you want to share something?
I did want to say that the problems that we have interpersonally quite often stem from a long time of having to put up with too little resources given to us. There's not enough has been sent our way, and so some of us feel that we need to scrabble for what is available and put other people down so that we can have something. And of course, that is not a strategy that actually works very well. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox now.
Oh, absolutely, though. As a community, we need to band and come together. And the point of if we can't respect each other, how do we expect allies to want to support us makes absolute sense. So no, your soapbox is very much welcomed. Thank you. And yeah, just the highlighting all of the needs. So that disability allies, which I like to really highlight, is a verb. I think when you share that you're an ally, you're actually doing something about it, not that you aren't openly ableist, for example, or openly homophobic, transphobic, etc. It actually means that you are working to contribute to breaking down the barriers that exist for people like all of us on this panel here today. So moving on to the next question. And I think I'll start with Dr. Scott this time. How can we make sure that the principles of the UN Convention of Rights of Persons with Disability, often acronymed as CRPD, are fully integrated into disability right law in Australia?
I just think we need to be talking about what the CRPD is in all aspects of our work and life. And many people, like I'm in a university, and many people in the university sector have not even heard of the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. So when they do not provide access to students with disability who want to come in a course, they are actually breaking an undertaking, a legal undertaking that our country has entered into. That is not a discretion for people to choose or not that they can do. It is actually an undertaking that our government has committed to. Many people do not realise that, and I think that's when we can get conversant on what the CRPD is and its power and what its effect is. Then I think we have to hold the line. But I will say that the CRPD, it's a statement of rights. So I see this as almost our minimum standard that we do. And the reason I want to do this is as a statement of rights, it's not necessarily one we can put out to have this bright, shiny, optimistic vision of inclusion. I think that's where we need to go beyond that. And I think a statement of rights, the convention is, there's 50 articles, but there's also an Article 51, an unstated article. It's our right to sparkle and our right to excellence. It's more than just getting in the room. That's what Articles 1 to 50 are about. Article 51 is our right to set off party streamers once we get in there.
Absolutely. Let's set off these party streamers. Let's make it happen. Like that is exactly it. You mentioned the bar, like the bar in terms of disability inclusion, from my experience at least, has been really low. So when it is like magically accessible, I'm like, oh my goodness, it is the most amazing place ever. When then I reflect and I go, well, actually, they're just treating me with basic human rights. But because we experience so many barriers and challenges on our day-to-day, the bar just keeps getting lower and lower, and so our expectations aren't that high. But you're absolutely right. We deserve to shine and sparkle and have all of those experiences. Over to you, Dr. Alistair.
For me, when we talk about the CRPD, the groundbreaking instrument that it is, But I find it useful also to talk about why we needed to have this convention in the first place, to acknowledge the history of exclusion and segregation, and to demonstrate and say to people, particularly those who are not familiar with the CRPD, and of course, as Scott has pointed out, there are many, it's important to acknowledge the history and say, but this is why we needed it. And so I often also, when I talk to people, I try not to talk too much in those lofty, grandiose, United Nations words. I try to bring it back to the everyday reality. And also more recently, I have, as you all know, experienced a role with the Royal Commission. And what was disappointing was to see some commissioners try and scrutinise every single word of every single article and to find reasons not to enable our human rights. So I think it's really important that we don't get so caught up in the minutiae of each word, but to take a step back and say, what is this document or this article really trying to achieve? And so I think that's why engaging in conversations of why we had this CRPD in the first place and how can we translate the articles into everyday reality.
Absolutely. That recognizing why we have it, why we need it, and how we make it happen are all such crucial components to really having that implementation phase, so we get to that 51 where we can really celebrate. How about yourself, Anne Mason?
Well, one of the things that we need to understand about ourselves and each other is that people with disability are simply people with bits that don't work or that work differently. That's all. We're people, and we deserve to be treated like people. And that's what the CRPD is saying. Why people have to be told that we are people in the year 2024, I'm not exactly sure. And I might get angry if I thought about it too much. But frankly, that's one of the things that people who don't believe they have disabilities need to learn about people who do have disabilities, is that we're all people.
Thank you. That's absolutely correct. Just even the consideration of people with disabilities as human beings that deserve to live our lives the way every human being does is it feels so simple, but it isn't, because we know it isn't. Everyday life it demonstrates to us how not simple it is. But you're absolutely right in the way that we should be valued and have our rights and our voices and our experience really taken consideration and thought of and considered. On to the next question, and I will start with Dr. Alistair this time. The next question is, disability rights are often seen as too costly, quote unquote, too costly. What strategies or actions can we use to change this and encourage progress towards a system and society that supports these rights?
Well, Akii, if I had $1 for every time that somebody has raised that issue, we would have pretty well much all our disability issues resolved, and we would all be out there like everybody else. So for me, when that topic comes up, I look at it from a number of ways. I try to make the point that we are all sometimes and often trying to retrofit something that has already been implemented in a way that means that we are still excluded from whatever that system is, whether it's physical or attitudinal or intellectual or and so forth. So retrofitting is obviously a big topic that comes up from time to time. And so I try to say, let's just go back and think about budgeting, access and inclusion and access and support, put it in from the very beginning, and then hopefully over time we won't be retrofitting. I've also been reflecting on in the last few years about it's not necessarily about new money or extra funding, it's about reallocation of existing resources. Of course, the danger and the challenge there is non-disabled people want the status quo to continue, so it's always and often very hard to change their thinking on that. And linked to that, if you can demonstrate that there are long-term cost savings, and our DPOs have done amazing work in looking at the cost savings that can be made. We've got lots of brilliant researchers and analysts out there who have demonstrated time and time again the benefit of cost savings long-term when we get it right at the beginning.
Thank you, Dr. Alistair. Anne Mason.
Well, now you're talking to the accountant. I've been an accountant all my working life, so let me tell you about costs. If you make a building, for instance, if you make it accessible, properly accessible, it may cost you, 2 or 3% more to make it accessible. Of course, if you have to make it accessible later after it's built, because it's the law, then it's going to cost you many, many, many monies. And that's what people always think about, is how much it has cost for something to be made accessible after it's built. Well, if you have accessibility in the mix at every step of planning and development, then, as I said, maybe 2 to 3% more. And for that 2% or 3% more, you not only get accessibility for people who have disabilities, but you have accessibility for everybody, because it gets easier for everybody to use that built environment. I have examples. For instance, in Sydney, the trains used to be accessible only by stairs. Now there are some lifts. I've fought mightily to get lifts in train stations in the Sydney metro area. And I was told over and over again that it was an expense, no one would use them, blah, blah, blah. Now there are lifts in most of the stations, and people who have mobility problems can use them. But guess what? People with small children can also use them. People who are lugging baggage from the airport can also use them. People who have had a hard day and are simply too tired to walk up the stairs can use them. Everybody is much better served because there are some lifts in train stations. That sort of thing is true wherever you're doing buildings or planning parks or any recreation area, any public area. And that includes things like streets, and I could go on and on, clearly. When you make things easier for people with disability, you simply make it easier for everybody.
Absolutely, Anne Mason. That was a great example. I always think to myself, it's all about ensuring that accessibility benefits everyone and disadvantages no one, which which highlights exactly what you've just shared in relation to how we can work in relation to ensuring that inclusion and disability. On to you, Dr. Scott.
My instinctive reaction whenever I hear that question, as we do from time to time, is, well, how would you know what it costs if you haven't had a go at implementing disability rights? But what I tend to do is unpack it a bit more. I really struggle to engage as that question is asked, because I think it speaks to who is valued in society and who can be seen to provide value in society. So if you don't value the elderly, then aged care is seen as costly. If you don't value children, then education is seen as costly. If you don't value people with disability, then disability rights are seen as costly. So I think you can unpack why that question's really coming from. And when you kind of rethink it like that, some of it, it's actually coming from quite a very antiquated, old-fashioned value base, which, you know, I think if we keep turning up and having conversations like this, we'll find itself on the wrong side of history. And the one thing that I try and do I come from an Indigenous background, and I talk a lot about our culture's inclusion, and it's very much I'll summarise it. It's a culture that takes all comers. You know, it didn't come from the sky. We had to fight. We had to make an inclusive culture. But what this idea of an Indigenous culture of inclusion that we talk about, and I teach it in my classrooms now, it takes you out of that mindset, this deficit mindset, and all of these assumptions that are being conditioned into our education system, in our workplaces, all these wrong assumptions about, you know, what we can and can't do as people, and takes us saying everyone has a place and purpose on this earth. And I think taking it out of that mindset, and can we build a better model, build a better society based on an assumption that everyone has a place and purpose on the earth, because all those other economic assumptions just fall away.
Absolutely agree with you there. Alistair, would you like to add?
Akii, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on that great example that Anne Mason was talking about, improving our public transport system. To extend that is, I often hear from people, you know, government and policymakers, oh, we need more accessible taxis, we need to increase the fleet. Now, there's a very strong argument for doing that to a point, because there are people who absolutely do need accessible taxis, particularly in rural and remote areas. However, if you invest more or increasingly more in the public infrastructure, you have, for example, less vehicles on the road and more people using trains and buses. So, you know, you can see where I'm going with this point. The point is, how do we get our policymakers to see the long-term, bigger picture, while also keeping an eye on those who do need particular modes of transport? Yeah, so it's a tricky one, and just keeping our eye on the bigger picture, and, you know, solutions that do link to the bigger picture. So I just wanted to pick up on Anne Mason's excellent example of public transport.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree in relation to that. I think the biggest challenge is in relation to this question is the point you made, Dr. Scott, are we valued, and that's why it's quote unquote too costly, but also a lot of the strategies or actions that can use to, you know, be more inclusive, actually, some of which aren't actually that expensive or don't cost anything at all, and they are attitudinal barriers, just like the low so I've experienced you know, low expectation until proven competent many a times in my life, or just not having flexibility around working environments. If I may, I'll share an example. Prior to the pandemic, I've been working for over 15 years, and prior to the pandemic, every excuse under the sun was utilized to deny me the ability to work from home. I had doctor's notes, reports, just 1 day, 2 days, something so that the commute doesn't contribute significantly to my pain, my sensory challenges as an autistic ADHD CPTSD person, my safety, my autonomy, all of those things. May I just work from home 1 day, 2 days, just so I can save my time and energy? Does that cost them anything? It absolutely does not. I'm working from home. So, however, since the pandemic happened, and obviously it impacted everyone, not just the disability community, it happened essentially overnight, and working from home became possible, and flexible working arrangements became possible, and quote unquote the standard or the norm for those many years. Though a pandemic, that should not have happened. A pandemic should not have had to happen for us to have increased working flexibility and rights to allow us to contribute and enable us to contribute in the workplace from a flexibility point of view. And having that flexibility, whilst people don't understand it, makes such a huge difference. As a wheelchair user with a spinal injury and numerous other disabilities and chronic health issues, I don't have the privilege of just jumping out of bed and then hopping into a car and driving to work. It's not 3 steps, it's like 500 steps by the time I get to by the time we get to where we need to be. And we're exhausted, we're in pain, so on and so forth. And then you want us to focus on the job at hand? Can you just remove those 500 steps and then I just focus on the job at hand at home? Doesn't cost a thing. But a lot of those barriers are attitudinal. And so, yeah, that I completely, the costly component, an afterthought, as Anne Mason mentioned, retrofitting is so much more expensive than just having it from the get-go. I think we learn and we really acknowledge that as a disability community and accessibility, we don't want that to be an afterthought. We want it to be front and center, part of everything and anything and everything, and really highlighting that it's absolutely crucial. And yeah, thank you for that. And so we have another question.
Akii, Anastasia speaking. Just wanted to let you know that we've got 3 minutes remaining on this discussion, so enough time for some final comments.
Yes.
And I just wanted to acknowledge to everyone who submitted questions that we will take them on notice and we'll share them with our panelists, and PWDA staff will also provide responses to these questions as well. So keep an eye out in your inboxes for that information after the event.
Thanks, Anastasia. And I was actually about to wrap up and highlight the fact that I really appreciated all of your experiences, all of your perspectives, and if you wanted to share any last bits before our session is over. Anyone? Dr. Alistair? Great.
Yes, people with disability are people with bits that don't work or work differently. We should always remember that, never forget it, because we're not always treated like people.
Absolutely.
That doesn't change a thing, we're still people.
Thanks, Anne Mason. Dr. Alistair?
Akii, as you were sharing your reflections on how you've asked for adjustment to how you work, for decades and years before COVID and the pandemic, I was only smiling because you might recall during COVID that hashtag on social media, salty AF, from the disability community. I won't say what AF means, but you can probably work that out. But that was the general vibe of we have been asking for these sorts of things, and now all of a sudden, mainstream and the non-disabled people are jumping on and requesting it too. So great point, Akii, and I think that's one I want to end on.
Thank you, Dr. Alistair. And Dr. Scott, any last words for us today?
I've been watching the chat as best I've been able to do and pay attention to it. And when I was talking about our right to spark, our right to optimism, didn't want to talk over the top of people's daily struggles and that. What I was really saying is many people, that's all they'll give us, the right to be in the room. And I don't want to be in the room. I don't want to be exceptionalized because I'm a person with disability. I want our community to be exceptional because they are exceptional people in the community. And we have a right to celebrate that. And that's for me what the International Day of People with Disability is, a right to celebrate because we are an exceptional community. Thank you.
Amazing note to end this session on. We are all exceptional. We literally live in a world and exist in a world not built for our consideration, for all of our needs, for all of what we need to fully participate. So I absolutely 100% wholeheartedly agree with all of that. Thank you all so much to this wonderful panel, Dr. Anne Mason, Dr. Alistair McEwan, Dr. Scott Avery. Thank you so much. And thank you PWDA for having me today as well. It's been my absolute honor. So yeah, big thank you. And I'll hand over to Deputy CEO Megan.
Megan speaking. Look, thank you so much to all of our speakers, and Mason, Dr. Scott, and Alistair. I am so grateful, Akii, for your facilitation of that fantastic, very thought-provoking discussion on disability inclusion. Every single one of you have reminded me and re-inspired me in the non-creepy way to just remember the importance of who we are and how we can impact and change our worlds and the worlds of people around us. If you have any more questions for our speakers, please continue to submit them in the Q&A, or you can email them to comms, COMMS @pwd.org.au, and we will aim to answer these via email following the conference. The PWDA team are posting the email address in the chat, so you don't just have to remember what I've said. Well, I'm now going to pass the spotlight. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. I am now going to pass the spotlight over to PWDA Board Director and Interim Co-Vice President Daniel Flynn, who will be the moderator for our next session, which is around realising our rights in law, and it will actually feature 2 of our PWDA members. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Megan. Appreciate it. I'm Daniel Flynn, as Megan mentioned, your Interim Vice President for PWDA. I acquired spinal cord injury, C5-6 spinal cord injury at the age of 18. And I've spent much of my adult life fighting for equity of rights, equity of opportunities, not just for myself, but for all people. And professionally, I've spent the last 15 years working as a disability rights advocate. So I'm really, really honoured and take the opportunity to be here today to speak on these matters and take part in this conversation as a really landmark part of our community's journey through this time. This has certainly been quite a year, and as we look forward to next year, I think this is a really important time to take grasp of what lies ahead. So I'd like to welcome 2 members of our community, 2 really great disability rights advocates, people that I am honoured to say that I've had the opportunity to work with previously, and I look forward to working with both of them again in the future. We have Naomi Anderson. She's had about 20 years of experience in corporate human services, and the legal practice manager for Villamanta Disability Rights legal service in Victoria. She spends her time fighting for what's right, fighting for our rights, and assisting people with disabilities to navigate the frequent changes in the NDIS and the other matters such as the Disability Royal Commission that has recently occurred. We've also got Belinda Kochanowska. Kochanowska. Sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry. But my pronunciation, please forgive me.
It's okay.
So Belinda is a lawyer specialising in all matters NDIS. She's the principal for Intrepidus Law, widely regarded as the best and leading law firm in disability rights and NDIS matters in Australia. She's got over 20 years of experience, and she brings both her professional experience and her experience as a both an autistic mother and a caregiver for an NDIS participant today. Look forward to hearing from you both on these important matters. So please join me and give these two a warm welcome. So let's get started with our questions. I will open the floor to both of you, Naomi and Belinda. First question is, what changes are most urgently needed in Australia's laws and policies to protect disability rights?
Ooh. Where do we begin?
It's a curly one, yes.
Should we quickly acknowledge country, Belinda?
Yeah,
I'm on
let's
what
do
are
that.
country respect to elders past, present and emerging. Over to you.
Yes, let's do that. I'm coming from Turrbal and Jagera country today. Also, for those who can't see me, I am a white autistic woman with reddish hair. I've got green round glasses, big red lips, and a floral jacket.
Middle-aged white woman here with grey hair, glasses and a headset because I'm calling in from work. Daniel, we had a look at your questions yesterday and Belinda and I were going to come and be so prepared and so on point and so great. Instead, we had a rant for an hour about everything that's wrong with the world and didn't come up with any answers to your questions at all. But we do have some comments, and Belinda, I know you'll jump in and speak over me when you're ready, so I'll start and you just interrupt when you want.
Yeah.
In terms of which laws do we need, the DRC did the work. We know the answers to all of these questions. The DRC they asked the questions, they spoke to, we know the answers. We need a Human Rights Act. We need it fast. We need adult safeguarding. We need to fix the Disability Discrimination Act. We need to presume capacity and not appoint nominees under the NDIA. We need to protect tenancy, housing, get rid of group homes, have no more segregated work and education. But we know that. You all know that. For me, jump in when you're ready, Belinda. We need the right people in the jobs to make these things happen, and the politicians we have right now don't, won't, can't. We need you guys.
Yes, we need
get
everyone.
into politics.
We need
get into Parliament. Make these decisions.
Forget the politicians. Forget the laws. The power is in the room right now. Every person you can see on that list, everyone you can see. It's the disability community that has the power to drive this change that's required. And just picking up on what Dr. Alistair McEwan was saying, which is very poignant, it's not about these grandiose statements around human rights. It's day-to-day reality. It's about the autistic kid in the state school down the road being included and accepted and celebrated for who they are. Right.
And invited to birthday parties.
And invited to birthday parties. That's what we're talking about. That's that level of practical reality and acceptance that's required in our community. And it'll drive cost savings too. I was talking to Naomi about this just in terms of, invisible disabilities and in particular autism and autistic kids being capacity built into presenting as some sort of normal person or neurotypical, that you don't need to spend money on that. The money needs to be invested on the broader community, just radically accepting an autistic child for how they are and who they are. That doesn't cost money, like, capacity building through the NDIS with, ridiculous ABA therapies and OT and all, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's about where Naomi and I have landed is the power is in this community. We've got to continue doing that. We saw how we came together with and we haven't seen the full extent of how devastating these changes to the NDIS are going to be. And I really fear for the community with this because, just yesterday, actually, before I was speaking to Naomi, a client of mine was panicked because her husband, who's also on the scheme, they're both on the scheme, received a letter saying that he has been reassessed and he is no longer eligible to be on the scheme, and his NDIS plan will end on Boxing Day.
And we have one for Christmas Day. So bad times are coming.
There
are people are going to be exited, and we need to stand together.
Yeah.
A law is only something that helps if you have a lawyer accessible to you or you can navigate the law.
Yeah.
Our clients in group homes with intellectual disabilities don't have any benefit from what you put in a law or don't put in a law unless they can access somebody that can help them. Do you think any of the residents of group homes understand the haggling over the NDIS Act? They do not, but they're going to know the impact when it happens. So we need the right people in the right jobs. We need to be having the hard discussions with ourselves about how are we going to stand together? How are we going to weather this storm? How are we going to connect disability-friendly legal minds with the community to make sure that we can move quickly when bad things happen, when people are being revoked off the scheme, where we start to see the outcomes of the changes that have been made. And we need to make sure that nobody's left behind.
The next 3 to 6 months, the disability community is going to experience the full extent of what has happened to the scheme. It's like a tsunami wave that's coming and it's about to hit. And like, as a legal practice, I'm preparing myself for the devastating impact that's going to have on clients and participants. And I suspect Naomi is too, as a manager of her practice. This is devastating what's about to happen, and we all need to be prepared for it. So in terms about talking about what needs to happen with Australian laws and policies to better protect disability rights, I'm still squarely looking at the scheme and the wholesale stripping away of appeal rights. Thank goodness those re-eligibility assessments for the broader community is appealable, right? But you're going to have to sit for 3 months waiting for an internal review decision whilst you've been kicked off the scheme, essentially, without supports for 3 months waiting for an internal review. Now, you know, we're talking about human rights and we're basically facing this very prospect. My client is facing on Boxing Day not having any supports, and he'll have to wait for 3 months to receive an internal review outcome before he can then go to the tribunal to try and make some sense out of a ridiculous decision. I'm angry. You can tell I'm angry.
I know we all need to go for a break. I know we're over time. Pardon me. But what do we need to get these laws and these policies fixed? We need you guys, all of you. Those of you who can speak to media about what's happening need to. Those of you who can tell your story need to. Those of you who can connect those who are locked out and left behind with advocacy, with support, with just a friend, with somebody who will do peer support. We need you. That's what we need. This not to be invisible. We need this not to be about somebody else. We need it to be crystal clear. This is our community. These are our people. And we need to make sure that we bring the rest of Australia along, because a Disability Royal Commission and NDIS review and all of this down, and clearly we haven't managed to convince Parliament that the rest of the community cares enough to make this happen. That's on us.
And I think, sorry, speak here, Naomi, but I think the thing that we all took away from the recent NDIS Act changes, that while those of us who had the vision for the NDIS knew why we were fighting and we were giving it everything we could, we were not successful. Ultimately, we were not successful at explaining to those who just wanted a scheme that was going to work, quote unquote, that this was not the way. And we certainly were not successful at cutting through that noise that was created by the government to get the average person on the street on our side. And I think, unfortunately, both of those things are going to be necessary if we're going to get where we need to go.
We need to defeat the very damaging popular politics that's been prosecuted through the media. Thanks to Bill Shorten, I'll just say it. It was a disgusting, disgraceful media campaign that was run to further devalue people with disability as a cost, as a waste of money. what needs to happen with the broader community is to understand that any person in Australia who does not have a disability is simply a stroke away from being on the scheme. Yep. Or a car accident, or it's everyone's scheme. It's an insurance policy for disability, right? It's there for you in case that does happen to you. If you're someone who wasn't born with a disability, the attitude needs to shift. So I think I picked up on that from the other panel. We're talking about attitudes and people with disability being valued more than we currently are. It's too easy for the media to pick up on these popular politics of people with disability being a burden and a cost, you know. But at the same time, you hear about injustices that happen that actually don't meet that pub test. Australians are, I like to think, a fair bunch, you know, and you talk to the average guy down at the pub about an injustice and they'd come on board with you with that. They think, no, that's not right. And so we need those stories to start coming out a bit more, we need to get the broader Australian population on side with this, and to stop looking at the dollars and figures and start humanising this a lot more. And that's where the community can help with that, with our stories and partnering with allies and forming more allies. We need people on board with this.
Absolutely. I'm just watching the chat and a lot of people asking, you know, why is it my responsibility to do something like this? Why do I need to take part? Well, someone said to me fairly recently that politicians, if nothing else, are just really, really, really well-connected people. You know, that they're in their local communities every weekend. They're in their supermarkets, shopping centres, town malls, and they're hearing from the people. And so if what they're hearing is not in our favour, then that's the problem. We need to get out there and start to overwhelm and start to recognise that people with disabilities are 22% of this country. If you include chronic illness, we're up to about 30%. If you include our friends, our family, those whose jobs depend on us, like support workers, you're talking nearly 50% of this country. If we can mobilise that, we're a force to be reckoned with. But we have to unite. We have to mobilise it. And yeah, that's certainly been a struggle. I also want to just...
Nobody can do it all the time, Daniel, nobody.
No, absolutely not. No.
You know, we pass it on to the next one when we need to rest. We hand it over to the next one when we need to protect ourselves. But we just need more people, so there's someone to pass it on to. And I'm so pleased with the way the community came together this year to do exactly that. Step in and out as they can, do a little bit here, a little bit there, or a lot there. We all have different skills, we all have different abilities, we all have different time constraints, but
we all have a different amount of spoons too.
Yes. Exactly right.
Like those need to be managed, and that's why we have to work together, because we don't have a lot of spoons, as just by virtue of just as by nature of our community. So it's
that's right. Just by virtue of having stability, often start with a lot less spoons in the morning than most people take for granted. I just know very briefly, because I'm mindful that we are due for a break. I just want to acknowledge too that the NDIS is only 12% of people with disabilities in this country. The other 88% are also hanging desperately on the changes that the RPD will bring. And as we move towards 2030 and the full implementation of the scheme, I'm mindful that whether people recognise it yet or not, we have the same kind of fight that we've just been through with the NDIS all over again with the CRPD, because what we don't want is to get to 2029 and have the government say, oh, we've got 6 months to implement this. Instead of a whole bunch of meaningless stuff that doesn't get the right outcomes for us. So we need to be leading the charge and using our voices to tell what we need.
Yeah.
Megan speaking, I absolutely agree with you, Daniel. And I want to say a huge thank you to everyone on the panel. Speaking of spoons, I think this is an opportunity for everyone to have 5 minutes to get a little bit of spoon recovery. I don't know how much you can do in 5 minutes, but you never know. But thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Belinda. Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you so much, Naomi, for speaking about these excessively important things. And yes, the fight is not over. We will be now taking that 5-minute break, and during that time we're going to be sharing an Eliza Hull song. We will return in 5 minutes. It is 2:21 Sydney time, Australian Eastern Standard Daylight Savings Time. So we will be back in 5 minutes with the song, and when the music stops, it's time to start again. Have a break, everyone. Enjoy your spoons.
Parents, doctors looked worried. They were whispering down the hall. Did you see that baby? Did you see that baby? Her mother had a child. I'm not gonna let her go. I'm a fighter. 3 years old now. She realizes that she's different. The kids are staring. Oh, they got louder. Her mother got proud. You gotta make the most of what you've got. Don't look away. Say hello. This is me. Say hello. Say hello. Don't look away. Say hello. This is me. Say hello. Say hello. She never saw anyone like her. Nobody on TV or in the magazines. Those kids got mean. She started to believe them. She ever leave this tiny town? Don't look away. Say hello. This is me. Say hello. Say hello. Don't look away. Say hello. This is me. Say hello. Say hello. I'm traveling down the highway on the way to the city lights. Moving away feels like moving on. She grew to love her this is me. Say hello, say hello.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you really enjoyed the song by Eliza. I know I definitely did. I want to kick us back off into our next session. What I want to kind of note is that we're now entering the second part of the conference, and I would like to introduce you to PWDA Board Director and Interim Co-Vice President, Eva Sifis. Eva, over to you.
Hello, everybody. I'm here today to kick off the Disability Pride section of this conference, and I'm just going to read to you something I've worked on over the last couple of days. Disability Pride. So tell me, what does pride mean for you? How does it play out in your life? What do you see when using it as a lens? Pride can be seen in many ways, and yet often it can be discouraged by society in order to make others comfortable. But I ask you to question this. Pride is not actually about ego. And even if it is seen as the first of the 7 deadly sins, this, again, is cause for thought. What is pride? As opposed to its partner in the 7 deadly sins, avarice, or extreme greed, pride is awareness of your right to be respected or to be honoured. Again, here I wonder why it is seen as something negative, because actually, and I'm sure you would agree, pride in this respect can only strengthen us. There have been times in the past where I have struggled with this concept, and with the aim of becoming stronger friends with myself, I asked, what does it mean to own my identity with pride? And this helped me set out on new paths and new experiences. And so, throwing it back to you, what does it mean for you to own your identity with pride? Have a think about it. Acquiring disability just over half my lifetime ago evolved over the years to acquiring pride. And I was overjoyed to notice, along with it, came ownership of myself with a capital S. It took time, lots and lots of time, and lots of work. Yet, through the process of maturing from a pre-Eva to a post-Eva, 2 or 3 times in this one lifetime, it has eventuated in a perspective that is both individual and empowering. I recognise my present strength would have been impossible to gain through intent alone, especially as a non-disabled person. Evolution means growing from one level of being to the next, and in showing this, pride is felt at just how far I've come. Acknowledging the massive challenges that I have overcome allowed a sense of gratitude for all that disability had taught me to dawn, and the light shone away the shadows of shame. Once upon a time, I would have been floored by the idea, grateful to be disabled. As a non-disabled woman, this concept would have been inconceivable. Yet, my experience of disability has permitted the remarkable view of our humanity being shared and not one to go through individually. Suddenly, the toil of constant expectation to go on striving for chances, for a sense of worth, dropped away, and I was allowed to be me. Disability pride is a superpower any of us can claim. However, it takes effort. Effort to overcome the judgment of an outside world that remains oblivious to our community's self-ownership. There is no need to search for approval when you accept yourself. Here, you can have the chance to slide this cape onto your back too. Try it on for size. Can you make it swing about your torso majestically? How could it help guide when you're in full flight? And where would you go? You might land in the arms of your community and flex the muscles of your resilience to help build opportunity for others. Or you might use the sonic boom of your voice to advocate for change or to call out injustice. And yet, perhaps you might step away from the public eye, expressing softness and kindness for yourself. Perhaps it is time to rest and fly in other realms. After all, superheroes take all forms. Their powers do as well. Disability can be a tough ride, but it can also be joyful and empowering. There are flip sides to everything, and it is important to keep this in your view. Disability as a superpower is not just a personal experience, for it belongs to the entire disabled community. Nothing about us without us, right? The strength required is a mutual effort, and remember, there are those who understand and support you. So come on, no costume required. All you need is within yourself. Thank you.
Hey everyone. So for those of you who may be joining us today, I'm Megan Spindler-Smith. That was the wonderful Sifis with something that just really reminds and settles us in the importance of disability pride, and that it's not an easy thing, but it's not always a hard thing either. And that is what I loved about it. So thank you, Eva. I really appreciated that. For those of you who don't know me, I am a very proud disabled person. I am multiply disabled, and it is an important way that I navigate the world. Disability pride is so important because it's about celebrating who we are and acknowledging and standing against those stereotypes that are still pushed on our community. It encourages us to share our stories, fight for our inalienable rights, and demand society to recognise and appreciate the diversity and strength within our community. On that note, I get to work with a beautiful panel of people to talk about disability pride and their expertise in this space. They're going to introduce themselves and what disability pride means to them, but I will announce their names so that they can share that information. So first, Leigh Creighton, I would love to hand to you to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what disability pride means to you.
Hi, my name is Leigh Creighton and I have Mosaic Transition 21, Down syndrome. I'm a motivational public speaker, I'm a consultant, I'm a businessman, and I'm a peer leader. I'm a man in a check shirt, in a check collar shirt, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Leigh. Hannah Solomons, I'd love to throw to you. Hannah, I can see you're having some issues. Did you want me to throw to someone else first while you're able to sort that? No, you're good? Okay, awesome.
Yeah, I'm Hannah. I am the chair and founder of Disability Pride Sydney. Until the lovely Isabella's group was running their own festival one year. We were the only Disability Pride festival in Sydney, in Australia. We now have another one. But whether the recurring one, we have had hundreds of people every year celebrating Disability Pride. We've succeeded in having the Disability Pride flag raised over government buildings for the first time. And we just received a grant from the City of Sydney to run Disability Pride in the Sydney CBD next year with our flags and banners all around Sydney Town Hall. So look out for that.
That is brilliant news, Hannah. Thank you so much. Isabella Choate, the floor is yours. I'd love you to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Isabella Choate. My pronouns are they, them, and I am an intersectional living experience advocate and the interim CEO at the Youth Disability Advocacy Network in WA, which is the peak body for young people with disability aged 12 to 25. As Hannah said, so much respect to Disability Pride Festival Sydney. I was really fortunate that in 2023, I was named WA Young Person of the Year, which gave me a grant towards a project. And I used that money to found Perth's first Disability Pride Festival, which was just the most beautiful day held in July this year. And a quick visual description of myself is I am an Asian tan person with brown hair, and I'm also going to show you all my Disability Pride earrings from our festival. And also brought along, I don't know if any of you know Carla Adams, but, oh, I've got a blur on. Give me a sec, everyone. Don't blur my background. There we go. Carla made these Disability Pride Festival stickers, especially for us, which I think is very on brand. It says take up space, disabled and proud, and just some really beautiful things. So I thought I'd bring that along for this panel. What else? Honestly, I'll stop it there because I could yap forever. But yeah, really excited to be on this panel to talk about with other people about Disability Pride, because it is very much a passion of mine. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Isabella, and definitely jealous of the earrings. Glad we don't live in the same city, or I would be borrowing them. The next person I'm going to throw to is the wonderful Marayke Jonkers. Marayke, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you all again. Lots of familiar faces. My name's Marayke. I get to be an ordinary member now. I'm the previous past president of PWDA, and it's really fun to be back amongst everybody. I'm also most known as the Paralympic swimming, and interestingly, that's where I started learning to be proud, because people celebrated my sporting achievements. But when I look back at my life, I wasn't proud as a kid. I was fighting to be like everybody else, so I would be included. And I'm looking forward to this conversation we all have today about how we got proud and how we can support other people to be proud. I have won a lot of awards, from Young Queenslander of the Year to doing work with the government, working in the not-for-profit sector, and I hold my Paralympic medals very highly and world records, but also being part of this board and this organization as president, because the difference that we make being able to fight for disabled people's rights, that fight is something we can be proud of, as people before me must have fought to give me the opportunities I had. So really looking forward to this today. Also jealous of the earrings. Oh, and I am a white woman with dark blonde hair, and I'm wearing reindeer antlers and a t-shirt that says Jingle Bells, which is green with red lipstick, because I celebrate Christmas as my holiday.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'm loving the festive spirit for those that celebrate Christmas. So that's fantastic. And last but definitively not least, Uncle Paul Constable Calcott, please introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, thanks Megan. Yes, my name's Uncle Paul Constable Calcott. Uncle is a title given to me by my community. I'm a proud Wiradjuri man living on Gubbi Gubbi Jinnaburra country. And it's a huge honour when community decides to call you uncle, and it's around my work around disabilities. Describe myself, I'm a fair-skinned man, even though I'm Indigenous. I have a grey beard, grey hair, glasses and a black t-shirt. I'm in my mid-60s now, although I don't look it. But I'm also a proud polio survivor. I forget to talk about my disability. And I'm also a proud member of the LGBTIQ plus community. So, and just recently, I've also become the interim CEO of the new peak Indigenous disability representative group in Queensland called Mob for Mob. But we're interviewing a new CEO, a deadly young woman, on Thursday that I'm hoping will take over the reins. I'm an artist. I'm very lucky. I love my work, I love my artwork, and I support a group of First Nations artists called Noonaron, which do amazing work as well. So, and look, at Disability Pride, it didn't come easy to me. It took a long time for me to learn that. I grew up in an era where you just had to blend in and not to be a burden and don't make waves. And as a young person, I also discovered that I was gay in an era where it was still illegal and you could still be discriminated against. And then being Indigenous, my dad was fearful because he had his younger brothers were part of stolen generation, and he thought having a fair-skinned son with a disability that I could be taken away. So I hid a lot of stuff that I am now very proud of, but back in the day, you couldn't afford to be. But I couldn't hide my disability. I had to just deal with that. So I think now pride, to me, and what's changed, it's about feeling safe in your community, to be who you are. So, but it took me a long time to become very proud of my disability and to not to try and blend in, to stand out, be my individual self. And if someone can't deal with it, that's their problem. And demand accessibility. If I can't get in, I'll cause a scene because it's not on. And I'm old enough now to don't care anymore. So, but even in the gay community, it was a long time to deal with being disabled, because for a long time the gay community was based on the body beautiful and the perfect body and everything else. So I didn't fit in there as well. So, but I've come a long way, and I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation, because I think I've got a deadly panel of people here with different experiences. So I'm really keen to be part of this and have this conversation.
Thank you so much, Uncle Paul, and absolutely agree with you. So I've got a few different questions to ask the panel, and I will throw to different people, but I would love to hear your responses, and please feel free to interact with each other as well. My first question is, how can we make the disability pride movement more visible and accessible to people who may not yet feel comfortable or confident in embracing their identity as people with disability or as disabled people? Leigh, I would love to throw to you first and to hear from you.
By creating communities in real life and online. Create accessible content for those communities. Ask them what is stopping them from participating or feeling seen and proud.
Leigh, I love that. And I think, it's so practical, but what I love the most is just that asking someone. That is the most important thing. I think people forget to ask us questions. Hannah, I would love to hear from you around how we can make this more visible and accessible.
Well, I mean, make it the feature story for International Day of People with Disabilities on ABC News, which we did. Have the Disability Pride flag flying over council buildings with a flag raising ceremony, which we did. Have a festival attended by hundreds of people with posters everywhere, which we did. Have merch. We also have merch and a Redbubble store that people can buy and wear and sell it everywhere, which we did. Have, so like in terms of visibility, have a grant from City of Sydney to run it in the middle of Sydney CBD with our banners all around the town hall. Those things would tend to increase visibility and awareness, I would suggest. But disability, like work get yourself, like, sorry, I'm finding, just excuse me, I'm not very good at seeing chat at the same time.
You're all good. I know the bubble's coming up.
Yeah, I think, you know, there is mixed feelings in the community, and I think it can be really challenging for us as disabled people to recognize pride, because we feel like mixed feelings. So in our organizing the group, one of our slogans, we have a bunch of slogans, and they really encapsulate what disability pride means for me, because I don't think I really talked about that. But one of them is solidarity, not charity. Embrace, don't erase is another one. Diversity includes disability.
Not the back. Straight one.
Equal, not inspirational, was another one. We deserve to be included, which might not seem like a slogan, might seem like a statement of fact, but it is a slogan. But one of our slogans was proud to be disabled. And some people really struggled with that, because they said, no, I'm not proud to be disabled. I don't like being disabled. It's not great. And I think like that is a real challenge for us as a community, to deal with the fact that life with a disability can be difficult. And so our literature addresses that. And I think like we need to invite all disabled people to define disability pride as it is for them. And to say your voices and feelings about it are valid. And you can have so many different sources of disability pride. It can be an identity. It can be what you've overcome. It can be the community that we're a part of. For me, it's all those things. Personally, I get sick of being told stuff like, you're more than your disability. And like, your disability doesn't define you. Well, here's the thing. My disability did shape who I was. And it does shape who I am. And it's a part of me. And so I'm actually not ashamed of the person I am. And so one of our members, their favorite slogan is pride is the opposite of shame. And so I think, you know, the antidote to shame is pride, and you get to be proud by practicing. That's the great Laura Hershey's slogan. So thanks for that. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. And I think something that what you've said reminded me of the fact that when it comes to pride, the part that I struggle with the most is that sometimes it's not all of being a disabled person, but there are parts of my disabilities or certain disabilities that I struggle with more around pride. So, Isabella, I would love to hear from you around what it is you think we could be doing to help others feel more confident and comfortable embracing their identity as people with disability.
Thank you, Megan. Isabella speaking. I love this question, and I might yap for a bit, but you know, rein me in if you need to. But I think that something I reflect on is that there are many different ways to make change. I think that people tend to see change making as, you know, the people who are out there on the news or the activists and things, and there are so many different ways to make change, and all of them are needed. We need a diverse way of change making. And so, you know, when we talk, I think earlier there was discussions about how do we get into the media and how do we share our stories when the media doesn't necessarily want to pick up stories about us. And it's like, okay, well, if the media is not listening, there's other avenues as well. And I think that where I have found myself sitting in terms of making change is I very much view myself as like a translator, or I will hold your hand and help you cross the bridge with me. So a bit about my story is that I was diagnosed with chronic illness when I was in high school, and a very, very big identity shift. I was an elite athlete beforehand, and it took me 6 years after being diagnosed to identify as being disabled. And that's because of my own ableism, my own understanding of what disability is. And so I did a TEDx talk called Disability is Not a Bad Word. And in it, I sort of break down those ideas. You know, I start off the talk by going, do you think that I look disabled? Because I didn't, and that's why I didn't connect with my community. And so, you know, being able to tell people that everyone experiences ableism, including disabled people, and internalized ableism can be one of those biggest things that stop us from connecting with community. And then like the next part of how I view my change making is by going, hey, disability looks like all these different things. You know, the idea that you have that disability looks a certain way is inherently ableist and has been taught to you by society and the media, et cetera, et cetera. But if I can go and stand up and say, hey, I'm disabled and this is what disability looks like, then other people around can be like, hey, this person actually looks like me, or they're talking about, you know, their symptoms or their struggles, and I see myself reflected in that. And I think that that's why, you know, during COVID, when we had or even, you know, we just have such a strong online presence and community, that's why that is so beneficial, because people are seeing themselves and their stories and their thoughts and how to navigate this world reflected in other people that they haven't seen platformed in our general media. So I think that, yeah, my space is about bridging that gap and platforming other people's voices. And I think that something I've seen after Disability Pride Fest here is we've got a whole new generation and cohort of young disability advocates who are proudly sharing their stories and going out and doing their own pieces of work. You know, we had over 600 people come through on the day, and each one of those people have had those conversations. We had a lot of people also talk about, like talking to Hannah's point about how pride fluctuates. And we had some people say on the day that it felt quite overwhelming. This was the first time they'd been in a space, a face-to-face space with more, when they weren't the only disabled person. And that was quite overwhelming in many ways, of like, it's beautiful and there's pride and community, but also I'm devastated that it's taken to my 40s or 50s or, you know, like I'm in my late 20s to be able to be in a space where people are celebrating and learning and asking about each other. So how can we make it more visible and accessible? I've got it printed out because I lose track. But I guess for me, making the disability pride movement more visible and accessible is talking about all of these parts of pride, talking about how some days I'm not proud of being like my own disability. That doesn't mean I'm not proud of community. That doesn't mean I'm not proud of the people who have taught me how to be disabled, who have taught me how to navigate this space, have taught me how to exist. But yeah, it's hard. Anyway,
Isabella, I think our internalized ableism is one of the hardest things for us to combat. Marayke, I'd love to hear from you around this space and to get some of your insights.
And thank you, Megan. For those who don't know, I use a wheelchair for mobility, but I was involved in a motor vehicle accident as a tiny child. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is a quote from the activist Stella Young: "We get proud by practicing." But we also got unproud by being taught. So we need to unlearn that, because I grew up in a kindergarten and a school where I was the only person with a disability, but the teachers saw what I wanted to do and be. I wanted to be in the school musical, and I had to audition like everyone else. I didn't get special treatment, but I could get those speaking and singing roles, and I could join in the sport, could be a part of my community effectively because I was welcomed and included. And I didn't actually really honestly notice I had a disability, or that, I mean, obviously I was in a wheelchair. It was hot pink with rainbow spokes because fashionable, but it wasn't bad. And to my friends and the other kids at school, disability didn't equal bad or negative. It was part of that spectrum of human diversity within the school. We had people at different levels of learning. I was the only one with a visible disability. Looking back, there's probably a lot of invisible disabilities that we weren't aware of. But I didn't know I really had a disability till I got told I wasn't going to high school by the government. It wasn't wheelchair accessible, and they weren't spending the money to make a school accessible for me. I could wait several years, or they would exempt me from the law that required me to go to school. So at 13, I went off and borrowed from the library, which took a lot of printing by the librarian, this great new thing called our Anti-Discrimination Act in 1992, and managed to get a barrister of all things to represent me for free because it was a good test case, and I won the right to go to school. After which I realized I had a disability, also how beautiful community had been for me, because until then, I'd been participating in sport, hanging around people with all different kinds of disabilities, but literally not noticed the word disability because we just all supported and included each other. If somebody next to me was blind and couldn't read the menu, I would read it out loud. Like, what should I have? Will I have a this or a that or a something else? And the people with no arms, we would help do their hair pretty if we're going out. And we just worked this out as a group of kids. So we didn't need to learn how to be proud until we got told we should be ashamed, and we didn't fit in. So then you go through this awkward period of realizing, in fact, you have to put on a huge act of not trying to not look disabled. And the amount of energy that went into pretending that you don't have 3 different outfits in case there wasn't a disabled toilet and you couldn't make it there in time. Trying to figure out transport that's accessible, and literally getting told things when I finished university, top of the class, with a nice award for it for the arts degree. And I want to be a journalist. The first question they ask is, how are you going to do this in a wheelchair? And my first question back is, how did I make it to the top 3 with my portfolio while I was in a wheelchair? But you'll never get told you didn't get that job because you had a disability. They're not going to say that publicly. That's the thing, you're left wondering. So I actually gave up on that dream that I'd studied while training for the Paralympics, living off study, and wanting to be a journalist. And I trained really hard for that, but I also did social science because I knew I wanted to give back to the community. I had to give up on that media dream because the doors were closed. And it fills me with so much joy to see the news and the media today and in the last few years just full of disabled voices sharing their stories. Like a lot of people, the COVID pandemic, while tragic, was personally extraordinary for me because I returned to my dream of being a journalist decades after it was over. Got a phone call from someone who said, you know how to use Zoom, right? Because I've been doing it longer than everyone else due to needing life to be accessible and transport wasn't. And so I was able to work full time from bed, from home, wherever was suitable, got rid of all those barriers. And because it was in the month of December, I started the number of interviews I could do, platforming disabled voices of how their life changed for the better, medical appointments, going to the musical theatre, social groups, things that are now going away again. So one of the things about being proud I can see is that we demand that space back again, that it doesn't go away with the pandemic because everybody else needed it. And now it's only us, but we're not special. Everybody else used it back then, and everyone else could keep benefiting from these things if we fight to hold that space that we are taking up, and we be proud again, because I used to use the language. It's been a journey for me. I used to use the language a person with a disability because I got taught to in every organization I volunteered or worked at, because I was a person more than my disability. But then I had the epiphany once the government had the wisdom to see the government's had a huge role in my identity here. After they said I couldn't go to the school, the next big one was I couldn't have a wheelchair because it wasn't reasonable, necessary, or cost effective. And that's when I left working for governments and trying to fit in the system, and decided to be an activist and come and join this board and really be proud in a different way. To take that space and have a very glamorous hot pink wheelchair, which I'm ashamed to say the first time I went out in public with it, I didn't want to do. I stared out next to my bed. I'm like, what do I want that for? But to me, it represented I was getting more disabled because that's what the people around me were saying. Isn't it so sad
she's going backwards. Well, my lovely hot pink wheelchair, Pinky, means I can reach the top shelf of the supermarket. I can get all the way around town. I wasn't stuck indoors and socially isolated, and she absolutely rocks. So there's still, no matter how much of an activist you've been and how much you've fought, checking in with yourself here. Hey, is this a social barrier, or is this something I've learned because this wheelchair is enabling, and apparently I need to explain this to the entire community if I'd like to be accepted for using it. But it's changed my life for the better.
Absolutely agree. And I think sometimes we forget the importance of embracing those things that make our lives and those parts of us even more viable and engaging. Uncle Paul, I would really love to hear from you. I know that having multiple identities in this space can never be a straightforward or easy space, and I would love to hear from you around this.
So thanks, Megan. Yes, look, the disability community is incredibly diverse. I mean, there's not going to be one sort of answer. Things are going to work differently for people. But I think to start developing pride in community to help people feel proud is, to me, we need to be visible more. We need to be out there, seen, doing roles, not just as people with disabilities. Like, I really love how McDonald's is starting to put, like, I hate McDonald's, but anyway, I really love how they're starting to just randomly put people with disabilities in wheelchairs in there just having Maccas like everybody else. And it's not about their disability, it's about them just being a customer and part of the community. I saw a movie not long ago, and there was these people popping up in the movie with varying different types of disability, but the disability wasn't why they're in the movie. They were just actors playing part of on a board or in the crowd. And it was just this really good way to bring people in and start to sort of raise that awareness. And I think a lot of our young people, you can't be what you can't see. And for me, I think the government and a lot of organisations need to play a bit of a role, and it might be controversial, but I'm a bit tired of the disability adjacent sort of thing, where I go to things and someone is suddenly an expert on disabilities because their second cousin has a disability or they worked in industry. And the thing that worries me the most is a person presenting to a disability support service of a whole room of non-disabled service providers, and a person whose only recommendation is because, you know, their cousin has a disability, and they're discussing the best way to engage with me. So, you know, those sort of things I think organisations and government need to start stepping up and seeing what they're doing. Even little things like, I recently went to a round table of a lot of NGOs up here in Queensland and peak bodies, and from what I could see, there was only 2 people in the room that had disability or identified as having disability. So when everyone went around and introduced themselves, I totally acknowledged and accepted there are hidden disabilities. So I thought, I wonder who's in the room. No one identified as having a disability, whether it was hidden or not, they didn't talk about it. And when I challenged the question is, why have we got all non-disabled people as the CEOs of disability organisations? Isn't that ableism? Surely, you know, I just went to the United Nations where 3 young people with Down syndrome presented at the United Nations. Surely there was someone in Brisbane that could have come and spoke at a round table, sort of stuff. So to me, we're making huge headway in pride and talking about disabilities and people being seen. But we take 2 steps back when we're not seen in roles that are valued, roles being paid to be the leaders. You know, too many times people with disabilities in organisations are volunteers on boards or advisory groups, but they're not in the high paid positions. You know, I would love to see one day the Minister for Disabilities be a person with a disability. You know, how good would that be? So I think we're getting there, but I think, you know, deadly people like here in this group who have these conversations and raise awareness and we can support each other, I think we can get there along the way. But it is about being seen, people feeling proud and confident, not feeling ashamed of their disability. Hidden disabilities are so real. I've worked with people with debilitating conditions, but to look at them, you wouldn't know. But sometimes they don't want to talk about it because they're too worried about being treated differently or the shame. And I think that's really sad that someone just can't talk about what they're going through. It's the same with people with mental health issues. When you see in the news, every time there's a violent crime, they've got a mental health, someone with mental health. So this stereotype that all people with mental health issues are dangerous. So I think, slowly we're getting there and the conversation's changing, but I also think the NDIA has just played a huge part in a few steps backwards. I find it very frustrating because I've worked in the disability sector for over 40 years. And I remember, it was very much about burden, the burden of a person with disability, financial burden, carer burden. It was about being looked after, having things done for you. I remember once trying to organise support for a young woman with intellectual disability to go and connect in the community and to link with people and form some friendships. And one of the program officers at the time said, oh no, she needs to stop mixing with people with disabilities. We need to get her in with some non-disabled people to make friends. And I thought, but her friends are really good friends and they have a disability. So you're saying they're not worthy of friendship. Many people worthy of being friends with non-disabled people. So I started to see a change with the NDIA where we started to talk about, instead of financial burden, we talked about investment, investing in people with disabilities to contribute back in the community. The people had this valued contribution to make, and let's support that and contribute to it. And we also talked about things like not about eligibility, but your rights to support, your right to get these supports. And very sadly, I've seen a change back to, with the NDIA and all this talk, and I talked about it earlier. Now people with disabilities are seen as a financial burden. It's costing too much. We're blowing money. We're spending it on holidays. One person does it, all of a sudden the whole community is copying it. Then we're starting to see no longer talk about your rights to access, but eligibility. And our decisions are being made by financial people, not other people in regards to what we can do. So I'm very fearful that I'm seeing a slight turn back to that language, which impacts greatly on people with disability, because it starts to change the attitudes of society again, to think we're a burden, we're costing money, we're spending stuff, we're ripping off the government, and that's really hard to go through that again. So I think we need to start making the government, organisations and disability organisations a little more accountable about how they subtly represent people with disabilities when you see them not in management and high paid positions, sort of stuff. I get asked a lot to go to advisory groups for a Woolworths gift voucher. Thank you very much, but here are my consultancy rates, and it's a minimum 2 hours. I don't need to shop at Woolies. So, so we still have to be vigilant on this, but a lot of good stuff's happening. I don't want to be doom and gloom, but I just think we have to not rest on our laurels. We have to really be aware that this stuff's going on around us and call it out, because we want people to be proud of who they are and not feel that they need to hide that. And that's going to be hard for people if they're seeing all this negative stuff. Coupled with the Indigenous community, media constantly, bunch of bludgers, all this sort of stuff, black fellas are out doing all this sort of stuff, and so that's, we've got to cop that as well, and the LGBTIQ plus community. Grew up in an era where all gay guys are pedophiles. So, so protect your children sort of stuff, where, I worked in care and protection for many, many years. And every case of child abuse was by heterosexual parents. There was never a case of same-sex parents doing that. And that's not bagging out heterosexual parents, but it's just that reality of these myths that are perpetuated out there that people believe in this misinformation. And I think it's happening with our community. But things like these meetings today, and I've never been to a Disability Pride March. I want to go. I've never been. so hanging out to be there. So, but anyway, that's sort of my rant.
Uncle Paul, I absolutely agree. And I think absolutely we need to get you to one of the Disability Pride events and marches that both Hannah and Isabella are involved in. Hannah and Isabella, I can see you've got your hands on and you want to add to what Uncle Paul is saying. And really happy to throw to you in just 2 seconds. One of the things I would love all of the panel to think about to help us start the wrapping up process of this very important discussion is, what are some key actions that our allies, advocates, I also like to say accomplices, can take to support the disability pride movement and foster this environment where people with disability feel empowered and celebrated? So Hannah, I can see your hands up, and then I will throw to Isabella, and then I will go through the rest of the panel.
Yeah, there's so much to say to what was said by the last speaker. Just so much to say. I have epilepsy, for example. So yeah, no. The point is, we have a slogan: "Charity speaks, pride listens," and basically at Disability Pride, we refuse to have anyone on our stage who doesn't have a disability, and no one who makes the decisions on the board doesn't. Like, everyone on the board has a disability, and that's how it has to be. Like, none of this, like, charity. If you want to be an ally, then pass the microphone to us. Put us on the stage, center us, listen to us. We have great things to say. And, you know, disability adjacent, I've got a great, see, I have epilepsy, and the number of freaking people who come up to me and go, "My dog has epilepsy." I'm like, "Oh, well, then you must know all about it. Let me know." "My dog has epilepsy." I'm like, "God, for heaven's sake." As are we, Isabella. Oh, okay, I got to turn this off. Yeah, sorry, I just got to get the, but yeah, we are, as are we, but yes, we, I think supporting grassroots disabled groups like mine and Isabella's is really important. And actively seeking out ways to support us. I think we talked about, like, some people in the chat were talking about, you know, disability pride is good for them when it's convenient. Like, a lot of service provider, I mean, a day doesn't go by where a service provider doesn't approach me for free advertising. Like, "Oh, can we have a stall at your event?" I'm like, well, when you stop using government money to line your own pockets and whatever, no, you can't. But, you know, I'm a disabled volunteer. So yeah, I think that's important. And I think that you need to change your thinking to stop thinking about disability as an option. It's not an option. Exclusion is not an option. It's a compulsory aspect of diversity. If you think about diversity, you need to include accessibility.
Absolutely agree, Hannah. Isabella, I'd love you to add to that. I'm just letting everyone know we are getting close to time. Isabella, I'd love to hear from you, and just 1 or 2 tips on actions that allies can take. And then Leigh, I'll go to you after Isabella.
Thank you. I think my initial points were in response to Constable Uncle Paul, but I'm cognizant of time, so I will jump into my points. I think that the main thing from my perspective is recognizing that there is disability culture, that there is distinct power within our community, and we need to acknowledge and celebrate that. I think a lot of people see disability and they're like, "Oh, there's no cultural part of that. That's just like a medical thing." You know, they're seeing it through a medical model. But there are so many things about disability culture that are distinct. I'm thinking about our creativity. I'm thinking about the fact that to overcome the barriers we experience on a daily basis, we do some of the most incredible things. I think, like, at Queer Pride a couple of years ago, my wheelchair fell apart and someone got a party hat, someone got tape, and we fixed that up, and the wheel was good for 6 months. You know, like, who else would be able to do that in a couple minutes? I think about our resilience and our resistance. I think about how the fact that we are resilient not because we want to be, but because we have to be. I think about how existing in this system that was not built for us is resistance in itself, how resting and prioritizing our well-being is resistance. And I think about the diversity across our cohort, and I think about how much I have learned from people with other disabilities. You know, I needed to learn from people with physical disabilities how to exist in the space and be visible with my disabilities. I needed to learn from people with chronic illness how to manage my spoons and how to have language around that. So I think that really coming back to these core things that tie us together, and understanding that we have so much to learn from each other and that other people have so much to learn from ourselves, that is what I think the disability pride movement is about. And I think that we need to, you know, claim that culture for ourselves, because when other people see that, that's when they start going, hey, actually, I'm disabled as well. Like,
Absolutely.
I see in you
Yeah.
what I need.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Leigh, I would love to hear from you any last sort of key actions, and then I will get Marayke and Uncle Paul just do a quick wrap up before we move on to the next important part. Leigh, I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. There's I know we are aware of time, so I just got one point on this question. It's advocate for people like me when we are not in the room.
I love that. That's so important.
Yes.
Marayke, do you have anything you wanted to add around what allies and advocates can do?
Pay us, platform us, give us jobs. Most importantly, don't only think about us on December 3. We're disabled every day, and we need you to be proud of us. So for allies, you don't have to be an important government minister to make a difference. Look in the room you're in, and if someone's not there, think about what might be the barriers. Can you mentor them? There is no way I could be a person with a disability from a migrant family who grew up below the poverty line if people didn't step in and mentor me, not in a formal way, and give me that chance. So do that.
Absolutely.
And be a visible leader. Just to finish with the story, I was once asked to MC an event at Parliament House in Queensland, and the Governor-General was to be interviewed by me. There was no ramp, and she showed leadership about being a true ally. She got off the stage and sat down at my level. Well, this caused the event organisers to feel very stressed and panicked, but that was a true act of allyship, because she told them to afford to find a ramp in the next hour or she's staying down here. Magically, they materialised this ramp that they've been telling me they couldn't afford. And that's the type of action in an ally. It wasn't an argument. It was simply a statement. I'm sitting down here because we're at the same eye level, so we can have a conversation.
Absolutely. And Uncle Paul, I would love you just to wrap us, and then I'm going to throw to our interim president, Trinity Ford. Uncle Paul, just one quick wrap.
Very quickly, all I can say for allies is walk alongside us, don't underestimate us. And Hannah, I want to take your one-line phrase is, hand me the mic. And that's how that can be an ally. Hand me the mic.
Fantastic.
So I think that's a great line.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm going to hand the mic to our interim president, Trinity Ford. Thank you, panel. You're amazing.
Hello, Trinity speaking. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, everybody, from that panel. That was fantastic. I feel so jubilant and, I don't know, put together after that. I'm really excited by what we've got ahead. Yeah, there's been wonderful discussion in the chat as well that I wanted to acknowledge. And I just know that all of this is going to continue beyond 3 November as well, 3 December rather. I am extremely excited to introduce the next performance. Eliza Hull is a gifted musician, advocate, and writer who is making a name for herself in Australia and beyond. Her music showcases her experiences with disability and reflects her journey with Charcot-Marie tooth disease. An award-winning artist, Hull has performed at famous places like the Sydney Opera House and Hamer Hall, and she's recognised for her efforts to promote disability representation in music. In addition to her music, she is a dedicated writer and editor involved in various projects. Eliza has also spoken at important events like the Human Rights Convention, where she advocated for the rights and inclusion of disabled people. Eliza has made a special recording for all of us, which we will now play.
Hi, my name is Eliza Hull, and I would firstly like to acknowledge that I am recording this on Dja Dja Wurrung country and pay my respects to elders past and present. I have a disability called Charcot-Marie tooth that I've had since I was 5 years old. It affects my hands, my legs, the way I walk. I fall over regularly. And I like to, I guess, acknowledge that it hasn't been an easy road, and I haven't always identified as having a disability. And that is because for a really long time, disability wasn't portrayed in the media in a positive way. I mean, still today, we just don't have enough representation. But in the 80s and 90s, growing up, there certainly wasn't a person with disability that I could look up to. So I hid my disability for a really long time and would desperately want. It's only been in the last 10 or so years where I have advocated for myself and for others and been proudly disabled. I am super passionate about advocating for parents with disability. Still today, even though there are more than 15% of households having at least one parent with disability, we are greatly underrepresented. We are still stigmatized, and we are 4 more times likely to have poorer mental health outcomes as people with disability, as parents with disability. And that is, again, because the medical space is just not accessible and inclusive. I faced a lot of discrimination when I was deciding to become a parent. I was told that I shouldn't be a parent, and that filled me with a lot of shame and vulnerability. And so I'm advocating that, you know, the medical space become more disability aware and treat people with disability like they ought to be treated, especially when we're deciding to become a parent or in that postnatal period. We really deserve a lot of support. And I truly believe that we, as people with disability, make incredible parents. We have all the skills to be great parents. We're flexible, creative thinkers, problem solvers, adaptable. And I want to see greater representation of parents with disability in our media, in our stories, and also in the music industry. That's another area that I'm really passionate about. I remember growing up and watching my favourite bands win awards and see them going up multiple stairs and just thinking to myself, I was never going to be able to win that award because I couldn't get up onto the stage. And so I am pushing really hard that these spaces are accessible, are inclusive, but just have greater representation. My dream is to see a disabled artist win an ARIA. That's what I am hoping, that one day I can see that happen, because so much talent is out there, so much incredible music is being made, and yet it often goes unheard and underrepresented. I'm also really passionate about young people and children, and I have written a children's book, Come Over to My House, and I have another one coming out next year about the social model of disability. It's been incredible to go into kindergartens and schools, and I think I felt really hopeful, because I think it's really beautiful that kids are kind and willing to step in and learn about disability, and they don't fear disability, and nor should they. So these are, I guess, all the areas that I'm really passionate about. And I also just hope that, you know, whilst International Day of People with Disability is such an important day to amplify and celebrate disabled artists and disabled people and disabled parents, we need to do this more throughout the year. I really hope that I don't just get, you know, radio saying I want to play artists with disability on this particular day. I want to see more artists being played on the radio, more artists on our TV screens, in our films. So that's my hope, that we just see it across the board and not just on International Day of People with Disability. But in saying that, happy International Day of People with Disability. And I hope that, you know, I guess I just hope that we see greater representation, because our stories matter, and that really we are what makes the world incredibly beautiful and diverse. And I am proudly disabled. The happy International Day of People with Disability. This is one of my songs that I wrote, I guess really saying, hey, I'm so tired of hiding who I am, and this is kind of like saying I'm taking the weight off my shoulders. It's called Running Underwater.
gotta take the weight off me. Show my bones for you to see. 'Cause I'm not kidding for running underwater. 'Cause I'm not kidding for running from you. I remember when I was 5, they told me to walk in a straight line. Growing up, I was always trying to fit in, trying to be pretty and thin to win. And I'm not somebody that you ought to fix. Yeah, I gotta get louder. Yeah, I gotta take the weight of me. Show my bones for you to see. 'Cause I'm not kidding for running underwater. 'Cause I'm not kidding for running from you. Hey. Oh, oh, running underwater. 'Cause I'm not kidding for running from you. Take the weight off of me. Show my bones for you to see.
Trinity speaking. Eliza, oh my gosh, thank you. What a performance. I saw there's a bunch of tears in the chat. I was on edge trying to hold myself together, presenting. If there are any questions for Eliza, can you please submit them using the Q&A function or email PWDA at comms@pwd.org.au. Our team will be putting that in the chat as well. I did also, while you're there, see somebody asked if that song is available online anywhere. Perhaps if we can do a quick Google and stick that in the chat, that would be amazing.
Trinity, just before we pop to Kat Walker, I just wanted to acknowledge that we're running approximately 5 minutes over time. So for anyone that has to leave early, we will be making a recording available, but just acknowledging that we will finish approximately 5 minutes over time.
Thank you, Anastasia. And yeah, our final speaker is PWDA member Kat Walker. Kat is a passionate advocate, sharing her own experiences to help others. She uses her research knowledge to support neurodivergent adults and those with invisible or multiple disabilities. Through her work with horses, Kat learned that it can take time for research to align with real life experiences, and that personal stories are valuable even if they can be challenging to quantify. Please welcome Kat Walker.
Thank you so much for having me, Trinity. I decided to talk about breaking the evidence bias today because it's a topic we've heard a bit about in the last few weeks, especially. And in a nutshell, I wanted to talk about the fact that evidence-based practice without lived experience is evidence-biased practice. So I spent my 20s trying to make the world better for horses, and the research I contributed to did have an impact on an area of evidence-based vet practice by amplifying the horse's lived experience. We listened to the horses when they told us the vets were missing something. The horses were right, and now I see good vets all over the world checking for that problem. But horses have also taught me more about myself as a person with disability, as an autistic person, and about what that means for me and my needs than any human. Not just the time I spent with them while running underwater, as Eliza's song so beautifully puts it, then after learning I was autistic, and then finally being able to put a name to my physical disability, but also as I reflected on a lifetime of lessons from them about autonomy and choice, about disability rights, about autistic rights, about disability support needs, and about hidden disabilities, because many horses I was working with had hidden disabilities that caused pain and distress. The horses that were born with the hidden disability I was researching had stories so much like my own. They taught me about the injustice of not having these needs recognised and of finally being able to identify those needs and still not being able to get people to listen, because back then the vets didn't listen. The horses taught me that lived experience evidence is important and that it was my job to listen to it and find a way to understand, even when they couldn't communicate it in words. They taught me that sometimes the most important evidence is very hard to measure, but when you haven't figured out the pattern yet, or when a need is so individual there's nothing to measure it against, responding to the individual need is still the right thing to do. They taught me, as horses who have been my family for years, still do every day, that I don't know everything, and sometimes I'll need something different to what I know is evidence-based. That sometimes best practice means I need to listen to them to find the answer because the evidence is right in front of me. That sometimes there might be several options and I have to pick the one that's right for them, even if logic says otherwise. My role in the horse world was all about the same tailored and flexible responses to individual needs that we were promised in the NDIS Act. In my life, that's a way of being and doing, because that's what the horses taught me to do when I listened to what they were trying to tell me. That's what my mentors did and what they taught me to teach others to do as a systemic advocate trying to bridge the gap between grassroots capacity building and those writing the rulebook. And so that's my frame of reference when I look at NDIS reforms and where we're heading when we consider what being disabled in Australia will mean for us all moving forward. I wrote a lot of that before we saw the draft NDIS supports list. I was thinking about it as a research pathway if I could ever resolve the disability tax problem of student debt inflation versus time out with no disability support and the time it takes to do a PhD part-time. But that's a breaking the evidence bias topic for another day. Because we're at a turning point now where we need to fight for our human rights and to be considered the experts of our lived experience and what our needs look like. In recent weeks, we've seen a mockery made, even of therapies with a very strong evidence base, let alone those that are getting outcomes for some people but don't have a pile of research behind them, often because of systemic ableism. The NDIS Evidence Advisory Committee may be focused on NDIS participants, but it's going to influence wider policy and research funding priorities. That committee is going to fail people with disability and fail Australia if it's expected not to speak out against political interference or attempts to pub test human rights. That committee is going to fail us if it's siloed away from the people whose daily lives it will dictate. It'll fail us if it doesn't consult us on innovation led by people with disability rather than providers. But above all, that committee will fail us if it privileges the kind of research better suited to studying new medicines than capturing what's effective and beneficial in breaking down the intersectional needs and unique disability barriers faced by people who have absolutely nothing in common except one diagnosis, or if it privileges types of evidence that perpetuate decades of systemic ableism and other biases, over formalising pathways to capture our lived experience evidence when a person needs something different to get the right outcome for them, and then reporting on those amazing outcomes. I know formalising it can be done because a mentor who inspired my title today, Dr. Kerry Ridgway, did exactly that. In the years I knew Kerry, he did this with terminal cancer, refining it with the evidence of the horses and teaching people like me right up until he died. My own horses give me consistent evidence for this approach to this day, always reminding me who should be defining what works. So I'm sorry, government of today and tomorrow, but I'm not willing to settle for evidence-biased practice when it's time to let the disability community redefine best practice for ourselves, based on the outcomes actually matter to those of us living it and the human rights we were promised would be upheld. Because if the Evidence Advisory Committee and its terms of reference are not led by people with disability who've lived the impacts of these systemic evidence biases, we won't see these assumptions challenged. The government's not willing to challenge them. DSS and the NDIA are not willing to challenge them. And despite the efforts of some of the best researchers that this community can proudly call our own, too much of academia is still unwilling to challenge them too. But you know who can? You and me. And there are two ways we can go about this. Government can stop telling us they know better. They can get out of our way and charge us with defining which supports lead to outcomes and how to leave space for individual needs and innovation and emerging research by us, for us. They can fund us to do more of the research we say matters and make sure everybody who wants to leave research that impacts them has sufficient disability support outside of academia for it to even be an option, because inclusion starts with asking who is missing. The other option is for those politicizing and dictating our lives to keep going the way they are and inspire a whole new generation of disability rights lawyers like Naomi and Belinda and those already on their way to hold them accountable for the decisions they're making now and keep holding them accountable under the CRPD and the Human Rights Act we'll fight for. Me, I'm up for either pathway because both can help us break the evidence bias with our lived experience. If that's you too, remember what Naomi said. We need more of you in the right places to pass the baton, but also because we're more powerful together. But I'll definitely leave politics to somebody else.
Trinity speaking. Thank you, Kat, for sharing your experience and from one researcher to another. Gosh, I appreciate it. Particularly animals are our allies from a critical animal studies perspective, not just as our support animals, but because we're all in this spectrum of dehumanization and eugenics. So we need to stand together as all creatures of this earth. I would like to thank you again and extend that thanks to everybody who's participated here today, either as a speaker, moderator, or in the audience, lighting up our chat. The discussion has been insightful and motivating. It's up to us now to continue to work together, advocating for and leading the way in creating the inclusive society that we deserve, and one where people with disabilities' rights are upheld and we are recognized, respected, and celebrated with pride. Before we go, I would like to acknowledge that all speakers here today are people with disability and are PWDA members. PWDA is led by and for our members, and as its interim president, I am especially proud to have our members out in force today in the hundreds, being the voice of our community and a voice of our own. If you are a person with disability, please, I invite you to become a member of PWDA. There'll be a link in the chat posted by our lovely comms team in a second, but this really helps us do our work of promoting the human rights, equality, and dignity of all people with disability with you. Membership is free. It gets you access to all of our events and our emails and information. Thank you once again. A recording of this conference will be sent out to everybody who's registered, and it will also be published on the PWDA website and social media. Until next time, thank you so much. Be safe and have a prideful day.